So the last thing that I want to talk about is really, again, back to the question of what is a social institution? And in that case, if religion is a social institution, what is it doing to help sustain society? We have patterns of consistent behaviors that form social institutions that have the need to address something that we need for society. So we know that society has to sort of answer these questions or provide some ruling or guidance for people and this belief that we have that connects ourselves to the sacred or the divine or the supernatural or the nature or the universe, whatever it is that we call it. And so the question for, as it relates to religion, is what is religion doing? Is it functioning for society the way that we need it to? Is it functional? Is it not functional? Or how do we sort of decide what it should be like? Again, how do we maintain or practice social control in order to maintain the order that we want? In the US, this is an interesting question because, as an experiment, a social experiment in a lot of ways, we decided as a nation, particularly as a federal government, that what we want to do is to keep some separation between the church and the state. This is very different. There are other countries, for instance, other states, and remember, the United States are multiple states operating as one. Each one of our states is like a country in and of itself. So there are other states around the world, other countries around the world where that separation does not exist. In fact, the rules and the laws of the church are the rules and the laws of the land, for instance. We specifically said that we do not want to do that. We would like for there to be multiple religions and people to not feel like they have to choose one or the other. So we made this separation. There's this really cool video that I like to show in my face-to-face classes from PragerU, which is not a university. It's a nonprofit, conservative think tank, if you will, very conservative views. But this one 5-minute video that you can find on YouTube, I'll do that thing. I'll put it here, put it in the description, that I think is very much worth watching is in the first 3.5 minutes, for instance, of the video, he gives you this really good description. He's a law professor, the guy that's doing the speaking, as to how we have used our legal system as sort of control or design what this separation between church and state is going to be. In particular, he shows us how legally over time, remember when we decided, us and 100 of our friends got together and said, we're going to create a country or we're going to create this federal country with all these multiple states, we said there's not going to be, we needed to come up with how we're going to organize that. And what we did was we wrote a constitution. And whenever we have to decide whether we're doing what we're supposed to do and how do we keep our order, we say, well, what does the Constitution say? And then remember, that's what the courts do. The courts say if you can't come to a decision, bring it to the courts make a decision. So anytime we have this, just like when we were watching the race video, you can follow the trail of legal decisions, if you will, to get a sense of what society is deciding about that thing and the place that it should have in our society based on the way that we intended it through our Constitution, some interpretation of the way that we've interpreted our Constitution, or, again, questioning whether or not it is against the law that is based in our Constitution. So this video looks at how did we come to this separation between church and state. It's a very, very worthy video to see that legal process. But what I really want you to focus on, or the reason why I want you to think about that, is because the question is, and he asks this, are we better for it? Are we in a better situation as a society? Is that contributing to the stability of our society by having this separation between church and state? He goes on in the video, also worth watching, that is clearly not what he thinks is the best thing. And I'll say more about that later. But the question is a valid one. We care about how religion is functioning in society. I think your book might even mentions, the question is, are we talking about particularly the fact that religion provides for us this social cohesion? One of the questions is it religion itself? Or is it the thing that we get through religion? Is it that we believe the same things or that we do religion together? We get together for these rituals. We get together to assert the things that we believe. We come together and sort of redecide what we're here for. Think about times of war. or times of tragedy, or for those of us to remember like post 9/11, or even the ways that people come together after a huge storm that's destructive, or after, at this point, 5 years ago, the death of the killing of George Floyd. When the community gets together and says to one another, this is again why we're here and what we're doing together, that really infuses a lot of stability in societies. We come together, we deal with our problems, we talk to each other, whatever. So whether it's religion and those beliefs, or the fact that we do community together, is a valid question. Again, back to the conversations about neo-local families. When you move away from your family, you separate from some of that tradition. Is that a good thing? Is that change that we should be proud of, or is that change that is destabilizing our society? So the Durkheim, Weber, and Marx all wrote or said at some point that the modernization of society, a society that's always changing or always becoming more modern, that you're always going to see a decrease in the influence of religion in particular. And when we are looking at that, for instance, an example I think that your book gives is the printing press. On the one hand, we know that the most published book, for instance, is the Christian Bible. It is the most published book in the world, distributed the most anywhere in the world. And so on the one hand, you would say that makes Christianity way more stable because there's more Bibles. That sounds logical. Except what we found, or what we know, is that the printing press, what winds up happening is that the Christian Bible gets to move in places away from city central, for instance, or right next to the church. And so that what you get are people with their hands on a Bible that can interpret it in the way that makes sense for them, or live with it in a way that makes sense for them. So sometimes what you see are the distinctions between different types of Christian practice, or even the creation of different type of Christian denominations, if I'm using that word correctly. And because you've got the ability to spread the word, the actual word, and I wasn't trying to make a pun in that case, but this printed word in multiple places around the world. So sociologists are interested in religion, the things that people believe, the basis that it creates for society, and whether it's religion or the practices of religion. I don't know which one is the most important, but that's why it's a major question. And so one of the things that we study in sociology is this idea of secularization. And secularization, write it here just so you can see what I'm saying. Secularization, your book does mention it, is a decline in the importance of the supernatural, or a decline in the importance of the sacred. Essentially, is a society becoming less religious than it used to be? That question, as a matter of fact, your book doesn't give it. That's why it's important that I write it down. It's a question of religiosity. How religious is a society? How much does religion influence society and intersect with other sections of life? There is something that I would like to share with you. So here, sometimes what you'll see are maps like this. This map tells us in 2020 from the US Religion Census.org. This organization, I'm sure, is using census data to build a map like this. This map tells us the percentage of people who are decide or saying in the census that they are religious, and what type of religion do they follow. So it's just an example of the diversity of religions in the United States. So when we think about the separation between church and state in the United States in particular, this is very important, or very important that we maintain, people would say, because which one of these religions should be the religion of the land certainly becomes an immediate question. This map here gives me some sense of the concentration of how religious people are. So then this is the question of religiosity. How important is religion, or what's the influence of religion in people's lives? The darker the color, the more concentrated the religious population is in that place. Again, not necessarily the same religion, but how religious are they? And so you would see that in their daily lives, for instance, but it also is going to trickle its way upward into the kinds of expectations you might find in their schools or laws and policies in their city or their state or their municipality, right up to what does that mean for the federal government. So this website, the Pew Research Center, they've given us, and sometimes you can see this in terms of a table, but now with this kind of data, you can look at religious composition in the United States. I can see right away that I can see this from 2007. I can see a snapshot at 2014 and a snapshot in 2023, 2024. If I look at this number of the people identifying as Christian, for instance, in 2007 on the census, I can see that this number goes down between 2007 and 2023. That is a decline of the religiosity of the nation, if you will, with those numbers, right? Or a shift in religiosity. It is at very least maybe a secularization. If you look more into the data, it could not be a secularization. It could just be a shift in the ways that people identify. So we are interested generally in who is religious, what kinds of religious beliefs do they have, how is that shifting in any particular society? And what's important to remember is even though I'm seeing this decline in the United States is still one of the most religious, if not the most religious in any compared to any of the high income nations. So you'll see these multitude of the diversity of religions, just like you might see in this map. And one of the things that I want to point out to you, for instance, is that there's a number of people who consider themselves to be unreligious or not religiously unaffiliated. And some of this one is particularly interesting. Your book talk about these as the nones, the N-O-N-E. In other words, I don't have a religion. I have none. That's the box that I'm checking. The nuns are important because this is usually how we understand to be people who are non-practicing and non-denominational. Sometimes they may call themselves spiritual but not religious. Again, you won't see them counted in these kinds of religions unless none is somewhere in this list. And certainly when you see sort of the percentage or the concentration of religions in certain areas, you won't see them calculated here. So when you see these lighter spaces, then you may see larger amount of nuns. The reason why nuns are important when we were talking again about the symbolic interaction perspective, the difference between religious beliefs and religious experiences. Some nuns, people who consider themselves religiously unaffiliated, it's not that they're necessarily without religious belief. For instance, some of them might be agnostic or atheist and say, I don't believe that the statement of, Jesus is the Son of God. I believe that that is not true, right? Is that a belief? It's the zero of the belief. It's the opposite of the belief, but it is a belief statement. And that belief statement will guide the way that they contribute to society or manage their behavior or think things about other people, right? This idea of spiritual but not religious might be a symbol of, again, people who might not pray, but they may meditate, or they find themselves wanting to be connected with nature. They might consider themselves to be part of a larger universe. That there is a religious unaffiliation doesn't mean as a society that religion has lost its complete importance. You just might see less of these organized religions or people affiliating with organized religions, which again might be related to some of these more neo-local patterns or just general social change around society. So the question of what is religion as a social institution begs to question, what should it be doing for society? Is it functional for society? And when we see these shifts in secularization or declines of religiosity or changes in the concentration of religiosity of places, like in our own society, the question is that a good change or is that a bad change? And should we be concerned about it? If you watch the second half of that video from PragerU, he goes on to say this is a bad thing. And again, he asked the question, are we a better society for keeping that separation between church and state? His answer is no. When you look at the sort of decline of religion in places, he's saying you also see higher crime rates. You also see lesser intact families. You see children growing up without fathers. You see more divorce rates, like all of these sort of social categories, again, that help us understand whether we consider society to be doing well or not well. He says separating the church is one of the ways that we fail at that. Not having church in schools, for instance, is one of the ways that we fail at that. So looking at those social categories, there's all kind of notes that I had written down. Looking at those kinds of social categories, if you watch the end of that video, and certainly in your textbook and even in your own general knowledge, some people will say that's because we've taken God out of that institution. That's because we've taken God out of families, or we've taken God out of the school, or we keep trying to keep this separation that wasn't supposed to be there anyway. And it's really important to think about what's the difference between the cause of something and something that is correlated with something else. But the argument is still there. And even if you don't agree with the answer that somebody else is giving you, for instance, or you interpret the data a different way, the question is important. What role does religion play in our society? And are we the better for it? How we use it or how we don't? Okay, that's the end of this video. Thanks for watching.